11 seconds remaining. One last rush perhaps for the Flyers. Giroux to Hartnell. To Giroux. Giroux holds all the way across. Prager scores! 2.1 seconds remaining, and the Flyers are on top.
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah, and I'm here with Chef B, who's going to tell us about one of our sponsors here. Chef?
Yeah, O&B Puckcast is now brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. The winter months can be especially hard on our homes, from roof damage and peeling siding to frozen pipes and toilet overflows. Call Summit Public Adjusters before you call your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be stressful and confusing. Let Summit Public Adjusters take the stress out of the claim process by having our guys work for you. Get the most for your money and your repairs. The next time the big snow or the rain leaves you with some home damage, contact us for a free consultation. Summit Public Adjusters are licensed in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Learn more at summitpublicadjusters.com or call 215-752-0560. Just tell them that the chef sent you.
Yeah, what was that number again, Chef?
215-752-0560.
That's terrific. All right, we're going to carry on with the rest of our show. And we are back. It is Isaiah. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast, episode number 243. As the Philadelphia Flyers are 5-3-2 in their last 10 games. They're 2-1 since our last show. And we are having a rare game night recording. I'm sure you understand there might be some events that overtake what we say or talk about tonight. It's just the way it goes around the holidays. It's really tough to get scheduling. We want to bring you a show in proximity to Christmas time. I know you guys will surely understand that. So just a reminder, we are brought to you by FlyersNittyGritty.com. And let's bring our panel on. Always to my left is Chef B. What's the good word for tonight as the Flyers are in Detroit playing the Detroit Red Wings?
Well, the one thing to like about Detroit is the pizza, the style pizza, the steel pans. I love that. Got to get a culinary shot in here once in a while as a chef. Plus, it's also a little dig at a friend of mine's big Detroit fan. Thin crust, Detroit, whatever, doesn't matter. As long as the Flyers can beat them and sweep the series, I'll be happy with that. The little bragging rights goes a long way.
Yeah, sounds good to me. The great Dan Soper should be with us directly. Before we bring in our guest, just a reminder that we are also brought to you by Jim South Street. 40 years of the best cheesesteaks, hoagies, and fries in the grandest Philadelphia tradition. You know you want one, so if you're down there, check them out. If you live down near there, you have Uber Eats, DoorDash, whatever it takes to get that delicious food right to your door. Jim South Street, 400 South Street in Philadelphia, PA. So moving right along, let's bring on a first-time guest to the O&B Puckcast. She is a partner to our buddy Russ Cohen on the Locked On Flyers podcast, as she is a co-host and producer. Rachel Donner, thanks for coming on tonight.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so we have this Flyers team that is a lot different. They really stumbled out of the gate, but according to a blurb that was put out by Charlie O'Connor, since early November, the Flyers are 8-4-2. That's a 105-point pace. And of course, we can always frame numbers the way we want to fit a certain narrative. So we're always got to be careful about that. But their expected goal share in that time period is 55.12, which would put them fifth best in the NHL. In other words, all that disconnectedness, disjointedness, lack of discipline, whatever was going on before is coming together a little bit better. What do you expect from the team the rest of the year? And what do you think, how do you think that should affect what the Flyers do from a management perspective?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I think two things were going on at the beginning of the year that caused some of that. Number one, there was the kind of surprise Matvey Michkov of it all that he was joining the team this season. And I don't think they necessarily planned to have him here. And so figuring out how to integrate him was one thing. And then I also think they didn't really plan on having Jet Luchenko there at the beginning of the season. And I think trying to work him in and trying to make it work kind of led to some of the stumbling out of the gate that happened with the team as a whole. And then it just took them a little while to find the right lines, find the right balance to kick things into gear. So that's, in my opinion, how we got here in the first place. Now that we have, I don't think it's a great option for Matvey Michkov, let's be clear, but I think it's the most ideal option for Michkov that we currently have on the roster. And they've managed his ice time a little bit better. They've cut it down. They're slowly integrating some 5-on-5 play to his game instead of just focusing on power play and 3-on-3. And then I think that, again, Morgan Frost, not perfect, but certainly the best option that we have for him at center at the moment. And so with that line as it is, the Couturier line falls into place because of Travis Konechny having to be on a separate line from Michkov, which was a whole other thing they tried that didn't work, right? Because of them both being on the right side. And then, then you have this Cates line, which is, I think, doesn't get enough ice time right now, but nonetheless plays really great defensively and can provide some, if not as much, depth scoring as we would like to see. So, I think we just have to continue more of this and then react to adjustments at this point, because I think other teams are going to start to get their number. Now, there's a whole other stuff going on the blue line, but that is a whole other thing right now.
Gotcha. Chef, before I go to you, I just wanted to let Dan come in here, and we were talking about where the Flyers were and why they've improved and how things have come together.
Yeah, no, glad to be back on the show. Been traveling a lot and under the weather, and but it's obviously this team's gotten a lot more entertaining to watch. There's still some question marks. I don't know if you guys mentioned it. I don't know if Emile Andre is actually hurt or if he's a healthy scratch. But if he's a healthy scratch, it kind of doesn't make much sense to me. So there's still some things to be worked out, and there's some interesting trade chatter I'm sure we'll discuss about who they could go after, various guys that might be on the block, what they're going to do with a guy like Risto. But as I think the last time I was on, this team was playing better, and they're keep playing better, and there's a lot to be excited about and watch. So excited to discuss it with all of you on the show. It might be my first show on with Rachel, so I'm very excited to talk some hockey with her. I'm a big fan of your show, so you and Russ do a great job.
Yeah, fantastic, Chef.
So let's get right into it. I mean, in your show with Russ today, you did bring up the Cates line, and you were talking about how they defensively they have been a lot better and they're very responsible. But you thought that maybe they could provide more and still would be able to provide more without giving up the defense and provide more scoring, especially in particular Tyson Forrester. Now, in my opinion, I agree with you. I think I'm a big Cates fan, but also too, I think that where's it going to have to come from on this line? Is it just going to have to be like Forrester? And because it seems like the way to do it would be to have Cates and Brink up on the forecheck and have Forrester laying in wait, and then after they force a turnover, it seems like that either Forrester's been cleaning up and getting his chances, maybe not necessarily finishing so much, but that's generally 4 or 5 players on this team not finishing. So I'm not going to single that out right now, but just in respect of how are they able to generate the offense on that line by playing, being renowned now for like the defense that they have been playing.
Well, you mentioned the forecheck, right? And that's a huge part of this line's game. And I think that's going to have to continue to be that way. Noah Cates is like super dogged on the puck, right? And that's a huge part of it. I think Bobby Brink has to shoot more. I think he goes for the pass more than he should in a lot of occasions. I think they're going to have to create second chances because Tyson Forster is pretty good at cleaning up. And if there's open net space, he'll bury that one. There's not all the time he can finish, but if he's got an open net, he will finish. And I think that if they can, get some, side angle shots that create rebounds, I think that is a really good option for them. And, to your point, Chef, with Tyson Forster being also very responsible defensively, if Noah Cates isn't able to get back quickly enough, if there turns out to be a rush in the other direction, Tyson Forster can cover that off real well too.
So you mentioned Andre, Dan, Rachel. We saw him take that big hit in the game. He had missed 2 games, and we thought that tonight would be the night. Just kind of maybe, as Matvei Michkov is an example, something happened on the bench with Matvei. Maybe there was some dissatisfaction with Emil Andre's play, but he's such a difference maker. And apparently he's going to be sitting out tonight versus Detroit. And it begs the question, like, what's going on here?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, I think it's a mistake, obviously, to have sat him this long. I think if the idea is that, presuming he's not hurt, right? If they're hiding some sort of injury situation, that's a whole other ballgame. But if he isn't hurt, as they are saying, then sitting him more than 1 or 2 games, I think defeats the purpose of a teaching issue, right? Because if you're just doing this for teaching purposes, you watch 1, maybe 2 games, you watch some video, you can then react to the criticisms that you're getting from the coaches, right? And then you give him an opportunity to take the next step and learn from that. Once you hit 3 games, 4 games, then it becomes an issue of, okay, did you take him out for teaching purposes and then you're not putting him back in because you feel like you don't want to mess up a good thing with some continued good play across the team? Or do you really think Zamula is better than Andre? Which is definitely not the case, right?
No.
So my guess is it's the former, because I do think Torts is kind of a little superstitious and he does not want to change things if things are going well in his mind. And I really think Emil Andre is falling victim to that.
Yeah, that's interesting because Dan, just coming off that 4-1 loss to Minnesota, and look, Minnesota's a better team. The better team won that game. The difference in personnel was more or less why they weren't able to go into Minnesota and come out with a victory. But at some point, watching Zamula, especially on that one play where his lack of speed and just recovery speed and his overall inability to process at the level that you would expect from a regular NHL defenseman, at least in my humble opinion, it just screams that what's going on with Andre is somewhat punitive. Maybe he didn't respond to what Tortorella may have wanted. I mean, we're just guessing here. And I think at some point, like Rachel said, it just doesn't seem to make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. That's people are trying to speculate if it's maybe an injury thing, but then why wouldn't Tortorella just come out and kind of say that? We've been talking on this show for a year and a half now about Igor Zamula, how many breakaways he gives up, especially, when he's on the power play at the point. How many shorthanded goals have been scored while he's been out there, his foot speed. I'm not sure his decision-making is all that great. You watch him play and then you watch what Andre was able to do where he was literally the team's best defenseman for a number of games in a row. And yeah, it just doesn't compute, right? It doesn't make any sense. And it's not like they've, rattled off 5 straight wins. They've got like 3 or 4 losses in their last 6 games. So it's it doesn't make much sense. We don't know maybe what could have happened behind the scenes, but I think we all know that sooner rather than later he's going to get back into the lineup. So you just kind of like sit there and wonder, okay, well, what's going on? But he's got the aggression that Tortorella likes. We know one of the reasons that Tortorella doesn't like Morgan Frost is he's not aggressive enough, right? Probably both on the ice and off the ice. And he likes guys that are competitive, aggressive, which is why, Mitch Cobb and him, we knew we're probably going to get along pretty well, even though Mitch Cobb can't understand what he's saying. But yeah, it's surprising to me that Andre's kind of fallen into this doghouse. So I think we just wait for him to get out, and we know he will, and hopefully doesn't impact him long term, which I probably won't.
Yeah, this could be another passing fancy of John Tortorella, one of many we've experienced through the years. Chet, go ahead.
Well, yeah, when I was listening earlier today to Russ and Rachel, Russ had a really good point. He goes, if you're not going to play them and if you sit them, you might as well trade them because somebody else will take a chance and they'll play them. And that's I'll be damned if that wasn't like the most true thing I've heard in the last month or so about this team. Let him play. Let him grow through these mistakes that he's making. It's only going to make him a better player towards the end of the season, to the point where if they do happen to make the playoffs, then at least you got people that are ready for this stuff. So, I mean, he's going to have regular playing time. So if you're not going to use him, what's the whole point of this? Then make room, make room for other people on this team. Then, if you're going to waste somebody's time like that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it necessarily has come to that point. I mean, I don't think it will with this particular player, but certainly we've seen that with Morgan Frost and some others. But Rachel, it brings a larger point into play. We've had this battle where a lot of fans, of course, wanted to tank and take that approach, and then we see the examples of that not working out for the longest time in Arizona, which is now Utah, and maybe that's just starting to turn around, and in Buffalo and Ottawa and other places where they just bottom out, get some really great talent, and then when faced with adversity, they really can't handle it. And then the opposite end of the spectrum, what the Flyers are doing is they're building team character, a lot of intangibles, new players come into the room, and there's certain expectations and quote standards. So the problem with this type of rebuild, though, is you can't keep going on and on. We saw that with Ron Hextall. At some point, you have to add to what you have on the pro side. That we get a draft pick who came earlier than they expected with Michkov. But they do seem to be at a point, things leveling out on defense. Goaltenders, we hope we have somebody for the future. We certainly have players in Bjornsson and Zavragin who may turn out to be the big deal in years to come. But are the Flyers at a junction spot right now where they should think about adding even incrementally to move the needle forward so they get out of this thing where they're just maybe in playoff contention to now being one of the favorites to at least make the playoffs, if not go very deep?
I mean, I think that is the correct approach if Michkov had not joined the team. I think that once that happened, the only thing they have to accomplish this year at an extremely high level is developing Michkov. I think everything else is just bonus material. If they do better than last year, if they're slightly worse than last year, I'm okay with that. They just can't be significantly worse than last year when all is said and done, right? If they're close to or within range of what they did last year on either side of the point total, I am 100% okay with it. But getting a 19-year-old kid who has the potential to be an elite player in this league, like a little bit earlier than you expected him in his development process, you have to focus as much energy on the team as possible into developing him properly. And I think, and that was, again, like I said, the problem with having him and Jet Luchenko here at the same time. They couldn't do that with both of them at the same time. They just couldn't. And Luchenko wasn't ready. So I think now is really the time where you just do everything to build Michkov's game from the ground up. And to Torts's point, let him do what he does best out there and don't take that away from him, but slowly build in incrementally the other aspects of his game that he's going to need in order to be successful in the NHL. It's not a one-year process, but I don't think that you need to take any other steps forward this year. I think next year, you look at what you can do in next year's draft in terms of finding more assets to develop, right? And you use as many of those picks as you can. rebuild your prospect pool a little bit, and then build on it potentially with some free agents next year.
Okay, because you do think about the timeline about, okay, there are some guys that are effectively the core right now, Konechny, Sanheim, one of these goaltenders, obviously Michkov, and you would think that also that Tippett is in that category, and Forster, who supposedly was in rumors, but the Flyers are not willing to talk about him. So I guess they are kind of young, except for a couple of the guys, the first couple guys I mentioned. So there is room for that. But with the fan base, of course, they're not on that timeline. Dan, because you were talking about a lot of things. Yeah, go ahead, Rachel. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, timelines change, situations change. And the timeline that you thought you were going to have when you drafted Michkov and when you thought he was coming versus when he did come, that changes the timeline. Like, I'm sorry if it pushes things off a year, maybe two, but sometimes that happens and you have to account for that in what you're doing. And are they doing everything right? No. Are they doing some things right? Yeah. And it remains to be seen how it comes out, right? And how we can grade Danny Briere and his administration. But I don't think you can have that significant of a change in your prospect pool as Michkov coming 2 years early and not expect things to change.
Mm-hmm. And there's some who might say, well, that would spark management to want to get better players around him to help get more out of him and have more success now that he's here. That's kind of where I was going with that, but I can see your point. Dan, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they are doing a very good job of what they have to develop Michkov's game. And like Rachel said, they're kind of giving him more and more 5-on-5 time, not just power play time. So I think they're doing a really good job with that. It will help a lot when he can fully understand and speak English. And I would expect that, with a full off season to study, he will probably pick that up. I know his younger brother's obviously picking it up a lot quicker than he is. Younger people pick up languages faster, but he's still pretty young. So I think that'll make a big difference because Torts often will joke with the reporters. They'll ask a question about Michkov and the communication, and Torts will say, I don't think he understands a damn thing I'm saying, So I think that they're really going to have to, before you can really develop a guy, you got to be able to speak the same language. So I think that will help a lot. But to Isaiah's point, one player can't win a championship. So they have a lot to figure out. I mean, they still don't have that center that can play with him. Are they going to try and trade for a Dylan Cousins or still try and somehow trade for a Marco Rossi, who I just don't see Minnesota trading? Jet Luchenko is a nice player. I don't think he's a 1C on a Stanley Cup winning team. Maybe I'm wrong. Hopefully he can prove me wrong. But it's one of those things that they're going to have to figure it out. And if they're going to have to take a chance and trade a Forster for someone who could be a potential 1C, well, obviously that's going to be a decision they're going to have to make. But that's a big thing they've got to figure out. They have to figure out how they're going to fill in around Michkov. And now they've got, 6 draft picks for 2025 that all could be in the top 45 picks. So Danny's going to have a busy rest of the season, I think, trying to figure out what kind of moves he can make to position this team to win a cup in 3 to 4 years, 2 to 4 years. Michkov will probably take a few years, and then he'll maybe reach that point where you put him with a really good center and he can be a 100-point player. So these are all things they have to figure out. I think they're doing a really good job with Michkov right now. It's one of the most exciting things to watch on this team, but they've got a lot of other stuff to figure out. So,
Chef?
Speaking to the center thing, and again, I'm going to throw back to Rachel and Russ's show today, a name that popped up that could be available, and you said could benefit, right? You said could benefit from a big change of scenery was Alex Turcotte. Now, I like the potential of the player. I think it's a risk worth taking. But the only thing I didn't agree with what you guys were talking about was I don't think it's just going to cost Zamula to pry him away from the Kings. I don't know where Russ. Russ is usually pretty more level-headed than that, but he said Russ and maybe a second-round pick. I mean, I know the Kings probably could use defense. Is this a situation where maybe you throw Ristolainen and maybe one of the picks that Dan was referring to, if you think you can pry him away from the Kings in that sense? And but because I really do think that given a chance in a new environment, I mean, I really do think you can probably benefit from that.
I would say sort of. I think that, first of all, the Flyers would have to retain on Risto's contract. Nobody's taking that contract right now. But I think that with Turcotte, and spoiler alert for our Thursday show, we preview the game against the Kings. We talked about him quite a bit on our recording for that. And I don't know if the Kings are going to be willing to give him up at the moment, because they just moved him up to the top line in their most recent game against the Pens because of an injury to Moore. So I think right now the timing on Turcotte may not be exactly ideal for the LA Kings, but I do think that there has to be there doesn't necessarily have to be a move made right now, but if the Flyers can find the right deal, giving up a Zamula or even a Ristolainen level player, I think is fine if it improves the center depth on this team in particular.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that happened before the Detroit game, Rachel, was the last Detroit game, was the declaration that Alexei Kolosov was now the number 2 goaltender. Ivan Fedotov was going to be number 3 based on their play and talking, I guess, with the goalie coaches, Kim Dillabaugh. And he's played very well, but the Flyers now have a 3 goalie situation, and one has to feel for Ivan Fedotov, who's a guy you really can't help but root for everything he's been through, the ups and downs in his career and his personal life and things like that. How do you think that situation plays out, and how long do you think that they will continue to have 3 goaltenders on the roster?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because my sense is that they were holding on to Kolosov and Fedotov at the NHL level, either because they were going to put one of them out there for a trade possibility, right? And they weren't sure about Ursun's health, and they felt like it just would be a waste of time to send one of them down. And specifically Fedotov, who they can't really send down because of his contract and the fact that he'd have to go through waivers and they could potentially lose him. And Carolina was in desperate straits for a goaltender this whole time. So if they're going to send Fedotov through waivers to get to the Phantoms because they've decided Kolosov is their guy, that timing was not okay as far as the greater NHL picture. Russ and I have said that we think they should send Kolosov down, I think partially because of the contract situation, again, with how much money Fedotov's contract is and the waiver situation, but also because the Phantoms are in desperate need of a good goaltender right now. And I think to get both Fedotov and Kolosov playing, which is more important than anything right now, because neither one of them are playing enough. Yeah. One of them needs to be with the Phantoms, and Kolosov has to be the guy because of circumstances. It's even if you think Kolosov is better on paper, which I do think he's better on paper, but I think given the circumstances, that's the best option here.
And yet you have somebody like Tortorella, this is where there's this conflict between developing the players and wanting to win every game and not having that broader view. And there's that conflict that's been there.
That's up to Danny. That's above my pay grade. But Danny Briere has to do his job there and figure out what the right approach is.
Yep. Yeah, no doubt about that. Now, 2 other things I wanted to cover before we let you go. A good story about Jacob Gauthier getting an entry-level deal as an NHL player. He had an AHL-only deal. He's a 23-year-old center. He's not going to be an NHL star out of the blue, but he could be a depth player if the Flyers run into an injury situation. And he's really come on from a slow start in his career. What can you tell us about this player?
Yeah, I am so thrilled for him, given that, he started off at the ECHL level, got the AHL contract with the Phantoms, and now has gotten the NHL contract. He was undrafted, first off. So to have undrafted players get an NHL contract is such an accomplishment. And I think it is certainly well deserved at this point in the season. He had a hat trick earlier in the season, and so far has 17 points in 25 games played. 11 of those 17 points are goals. He is a really solid goal scorer at the AHL level, and he has really improved tremendously from last season to this season. His shot is better. He looks a lot smarter out there, and I think that he's able to take on extra minutes now that he's had to do that, especially now that Anthony Richard is hurt. They've moved him up in the lineup recently, and I really think he's going to be a call-up option down the road a little bit, maybe late this season or early next season. I would look for that, and I thought he had a good camp too in development and training camp.
He did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's a good story, and it's good to have a little more organizational depth, considering that players like Abels and Eklund look more like Euro or AHL level players.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Now, coming up next week, I guess, what is it, the 26th through January 5th, we have the WJC, the World Junior Championship Tournament, and that's in Ottawa. The Flyers have 5 players that are going to be represented at that tournament for Canada: Jet Lachenko, Oliver Bonk, and Carson Bjarnason, the goaltender. Then for Sweden, we have Jack Berglund. I think he was drafted number 2nd round draft pick last year, I believe. And then Heikki Ruonen from Finland, another center, maybe a little bit less skilled, but we had a lot of feedback that people thought that was a very good value pick.
Yes.
Is there anything remarkable about any of the players besides the obvious Lachenko and Bonk that we know a lot about? Something to look for as we tune into the NHL Network next week and start watching these games. What gets you excited?
Well, I want to see the battle on Team Canada for who gets the number 1 goaltending spot. Bjarnason is going to fight for it, but I don't know that he'll necessarily get it. So seeing what they do in like preliminary games and the first couple of games is going to be a big indicator there for me. So, I think that I'm not really worried about Bonk, and, I'm not worried about Berglund in particular. I think this will just be good experience across the board for everyone else. But Bjarnason is the one out of all of them that really needs to like put an exclamation point on this tournament, because he's had like a rough career with Brandon because they've been a bad team. Put him with a really good team, and does he win that starting job? That's a big deal.
Very interesting. Yeah, we'll definitely be checking that out. Well, that was the last one from me. If any of you guys have any questions for Rachel before we let her get on with her evening. Rachel, where can people find your work and find you on social media so we can make sure we never miss an episode of Locked On Flyers?
Yeah, so me and Russ host Locked On Flyers every day on the Locked On Podcast Network. You can Google us. We're on YouTube, all your favorite podcasting listening outlets there. I also host or co-host the Friday show of the Locked On NHL podcast with my good friend Gil Martin from Locked On Islanders. And I just launched with Erica Ayala, our women's hockey report, which is a new women's hockey podcast every Saturday on Locked On. That's in the Locked On NHL podcast feed as well. So you can find that there. Having a really good time watching the PWHL season thus far.
Fantastic.
That sounds like a great one.
Yeah. Check that out. That's coming on, because I just, me personally, I always thought that women's hockey, of all the women's team sports, I find it the most compelling, very competitive.
Yeah.
And
I have one more question then for Rachel.
Yeah.
Why doesn't Philly have a hockey team?
Listen.
Seems like you could put any franchise in Philadelphia, and it seems like in any sport, the Wings, hell, and the what do you call it, the Union, and even hockey and other stuff does well here. We don't have a WNBA team, I don't think. We don't have a hockey team. It signs
And a
of all
soccer
the
team either.
places. Yeah, exactly. And so it doesn't seem right. Something's got to change there.
Yeah, it's a big problem. It's something I talk about all the time and I complain about all the time. I'm currently wearing my New York Liberty championship sweatshirt right now because that's all I got, right?
You can't be forced to root for a New York team like that. That's not fair.
Well, that is the world we live in right now. And once we get a WNBA team in Philly with John Staley as the head coach, I will be the happiest person alive. And then a women's hockey team would be incredible as well. I do think there's a struggle with the Wells Fargo Center and scheduling because there's so much going on there with 3 pro teams and then all the concerts and other events. It's tough when you can't go to the league and say, hey, we have a premier venue for you to play in because there's literally no other rink in the entire metro area that would suffice. Wow. Because the class of 23 rink at Penn, it only seats I think 2,500 people. That's not enough.
No.
So
not even close.
You got to either build a rink or figure out a way to fit them in Wells Fargo's busy schedule.
Yeah, you don't need another Mullet Arena, especially if you're coming in with a new team like that. So,
yeah.
Rachel, thanks again so much and hope to see you down the road again very soon.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Rachel.
Take care. Well, folks, you heard from Rachel. She seems to have a really very measured approach to what the Flyers need to do, as contrasted by what we see on Flyer social media, otherwise known as Flyer Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, or Blue Sky these days. Also in that club, the fans want action. The fans, having gone through the Hextall era, are really wary of a general manager who seems to be slow on the trigger or just reluctant in general. And I just feel like it's one of two things. Either really Briere is reluctant and because the ideal trade is not out there, or he doesn't want to squander resources and blow the opportunity should the really good deal arise. And I think it's probably more the latter. Chef?
Yeah, that's what I would say. I mean, at this point, as you get closer to, I guess, the trade deadline, and then after that's done, and you get closer to the draft and, free agency, the value of what Danny has is going to get even better. It's going to have more bang for its buck as desperation sets in on some other teams. I just think it's just going to age better. People have made little moves here and there, but I just don't see the urgency quite yet because, whatever, it doesn't matter if you're projected to 101 points right now, well, you know that the team is going to fall off because you yourself has even acknowledged that they can't keep up that pace all season, not with the style of play. People are going to break down. People are going to get injured, blocking shots, blah, 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 all that stuff that factors into it. So that 101 number, it might be 93 at that point or 92 at that point. So when they falter or they fall out, maybe not because of their, just freak injuries and stuff like that, I think that maybe the need to move will arise and people will see that and approach Danny more, knowing that, all right, you're kind of out of it. What do you say now then, or make deals? I think it's just going to age a little better. I don't think now's the time to make the deal. You're not going to make it. Well, they're going to put a freeze on it for the holidays anyway.
Oh, sure. Nothing before Thursday.
And so whatever you're talking about now it's just going to percolate over the holidays. And when everything opens up, I really think that stuff will start heating up again in February. People will really start bearing down and get serious about stuff. So we'll see.
Yeah, Dan, hasn't Jonesy been quoted as saying that the Flyers will probably be active at the trade deadline, actually, letting go of players much in the manner as they did last year?
Yeah, he's come out and said that. And the thing that makes me a little nervous is with a guy like Ristolainen, who, Anthony DeMarco, our good friend, wrote an article about some Flyers-related topics. He talked about Ristolainen and sort of mentioned it with how well Ristolainen's been playing this year, which I do agree with, that, the price for him is going up. I guess one of my concerns is he's a guy that's dealt with some injuries in the past. So, and you can't live your life this way, getting worried about injuries and guys getting injured. But I do have some concerns about, hey, we wait to move him, and a month before the trade deadline, he injures himself again and needs some kind of weird tricep surgery again. So that's one of my concerns. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You've got a player like Scott Lawton, who is, I'm just convinced at this point that the guy's going to finish his career a Philadelphia Flyer. Like every year it's, oh, well, Lawton is the perfect candidate to go to some team who needs a heart and character guy. And, he's got some trade value, and then they just never seem to trade the guy. So I'm convinced with him, even a guy like Claude Giroux was too talented not to trade, basically, once they sort of decided that they weren't going to pay his next contract. Scott Lawton's one of these tweener guys who you can sort of justify holding on to if you're not going to get a first-round pick, and, you think that maybe you can work out a better deal for him moving forward. So that'll be an interesting one to watch. But yeah, I mean, I certainly think that they know where they stand, the Flyers, right now, and they know that they still probably need to be sellers leading up to the trade deadline. So it's just a matter of how they construct things. And as we've discussed, they need to figure out a way to add someone who at least has the potential to be that type of rock solid center on the first line or the second line. And I mentioned Dylan Cousins earlier. He's gotten kind of a lot of discussion recently. They've got to figure something out.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about it. I mean, I list them as having three major needs. The center's obvious, but I think they still need a defenseman who could be a first pair guy. Whether it's Sanheim really is a first pair guy, I'm still not convinced he is, that he's that alpha dog, the lead guy when you're first pair, or even as a complement. We're not really sure what Oliver Bonk is going to be. We think he should be a top four player. Is Cam York a trade candidate as a result of Emil's emergence? These are questions. And how many guys can you have that play like Drysdale and York and Andre and all that? And then, of course, I think they need a power forward, especially the way the lineup is constructed, a left shooting power forward that gives them some snarl. Someone gives them net front presence that translates on the power play, something they really need that could put them over the top, that they could get some more garbage goals and rebounds and deflections, something they haven't had since, I don't know, I guess Braden Shen kind of took over for Hartnell. But since then, that's really, and maybe Simmer too, but it hasn't been consistent for the longest time. And I think the frustration with the fans wanting the Flyers to make these trades is, Chef, that concern that we're seeing a replay of the Hextall years. And I'm starting to get to a point myself as we come into the trade deadline of understanding that a little bit more. I thought it was a little premature earlier, but yeah, I mean, it's hard to watch guys get signed up and you're kind of locked in with Couturier. You're locked in with Sanheim. Now you're locked in with Konechny. And how many guys are you going to lock up when you're really not that good? Now you got Michkov and you could shake things up. I know you got the room and all that, but your room, and you're still not going to make the playoffs probably because for the reasons you cited, the style they play with the lack of talent and production that they have is hard to maintain if you're always on your heels blocking shots, hoping for a save, and you win a game 3-2 if you're lucky.
Yeah, you lock it up. Yeah, so sorry, always good for a Wedding Crashers reference. But so, hey, what can you do? You got to take the shot when you have it. So I don't, like I said, I don't think it's, I understand the frustration from Flyers fans. I mean, more not as, you're probably more so than me. We're the older crowd. We've been suffering now since 88, 89, without that big run. And then, but the young kids, there are kids out there now that have never seen a Flyers in a playoff game. So how crazy is that? and then you get the COVID lockout season that they were actually in the mix, but it was just weird. It didn't feel like hockey, even. It felt like bubble hockey. But
That was an
so
anomaly.
yeah. And so now I understand their frustration, but when you're building something or you're making a 5-star dish or whatever it is, whatever you're doing, you got to have the right ingredients. You have to have the right materials. You have to do it in the right way. And I get it, but after 1.5 years of little moves, I mean, look, man, we had he got a premier player at later, not in the first 2 slots in the draft. Granted, there were conditions, but he took the chance on it, and we got Mitchkov, and then we got Mitchkov 2.5 years early. So you got to hang in there. It's the problem is because if Mitchkov isn't here, like Rachel said, if Mitchkov isn't here, our expectations are a lot worse. We're thinking this team, they're not going to make the playoffs, easily not make the playoffs. We're thinking, man, they can lose enough when we get 5 or, we're picking around 4 or 5, maybe trade up, that kind of, it's a whole different animal. I think Mitchkov actually makes people more hungry, and rightfully so, because you see what he, the flashes of his capability. So my whole thing is this: you just got to hang tight. I think the big stuff's going to happen in the off season. I really do. It's going to happen around the draft and the trade deadline. I think there'll be a huge move. It's just a gut feeling because they have too many assets. You're not going to sign 6 top 45 guys. Financially, I don't think any organization could take that hit in one season. So you got to space things out too. But you have that draft capital to make a big deal. If you want your big center, you want your number 1 guy, this is the off season to do it.
Well, we hope so. I mean, the problem I have, and look, they had a good run with Lindros in the 90s. We don't have to tell the great Dan Silver that at D Silver 88 on X. And yeah, there's no doubt about that. And of course, the 2010 run was part of the 2008 to 2012 era. So the Flyers have had a couple eras since the 80s. And of course, I was able to watch them win a couple cups. But I think really for the last dozen years, this is where I'm really antsy. And it's interesting to see the different responses to Michkov here. One says, oh, okay, now you have to be patient, let him develop. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. Things change. Guys get hurt. If you have a player like him and you think he's going to be a point-a-game player to even maybe a 100-point player perhaps, I'm thinking, you want to get this team ready to go in about 2 years to do something, well, you got to start acquiring assets. If you draft guys, they're not going to be ready for 2-3 years to become, key players on your team unless you get lucky and you win a lottery ball. So now that would seem to indicate, at least to me, that you're going to have to play in your free agent market. And it's going to be a combo platter of drafting, but you're going to have to use some assets and move on from some players to make room. And you're going to have to overpay if you want to get a center, unless you can grab somebody like Quentin Byfield if Rob Blake has a thrombo and trades him, which I'm not counting on that. So that's the dilemma to me. I think waiting puts too much at risk. Like Dan, like you're saying, you're worried about just getting Risto to trade deadline because he could get hurt. Well, that applies to a lot of guys, and things can change very quickly. So when you get a player like Michkov, it would seem like you want to strike while the iron's hot, but maybe the more cautious approach is actually the more prudent one.
Yeah, it just depends on what's available. And as we've talked about, there's really not a whole lot of salary cap space for this team to do something right now, if that's kind of what you're getting at. And I'm also not sure that this team's goaltending is ready to make a sustained bid in the playoffs, although I guess you never really know which goalies are going to be hot. But Urson's been injured a lot this year, and Kolosov is still kind of finding his stride, his in the NHL crease. So I still am of the opinion that if you can do what you can to try and, make some moves and with the idea that maybe next year you can gear up even more. Hopefully next year Lutsenko will make the team, and that'll give you some more excitement down the middle. We know how Torts loves his players who can skate well. It will be fun to watch at the World Juniors, although this is the first year that I don't have NHL Network, so I'm gonna have to try and figure out a way to watch the World Juniors. But I think it'll be fun seeing how Luchenko does against those kinds of players. Oliver Bonk's a guy who I'm not fully convinced on yet. I still haven't seen him play a game that's made me sort of turn my head and be like, man, that's really impressive. So anyway, I got a little bit off base there, but off discussion. But yeah, I think it's fine to not push your chips into the middle this year, or at least edge them towards the middle, and instead just kind of make some moves to look forward, I would say. Guys like Brink, Forrester, we're gonna need to see more from these guys in the second half too.
Mm-hmm.
So, and what interesting thing to me is, I sort of always thought
Farabee.
Farabee. Well, again, I just don't know how long he's going to be on this team, but it seems like they can't find a center target that they really like and that they think is worth moving something like Forrester and or Farabee for, which is not surprising because teams don't give up guys like that, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, Marco Rossi's been a guy we've talked about a lot. He's literally like been the 1C for Minnesota a lot of this year. Why would they trade him? I don't know. So that's the challenge, right? You know, maybe wouldn't it be great if we could take all 6 of our draft picks in the first and second round and trade them for like the number 1 overall pick and you know, take a James Higgins or a Michael Misa or a Roger McQueen or something like that. That would be a nice little solution, but we'll see. Hopefully they'll be able to work something out. They have too many draft picks not to be able to figure something out.
Yes.
Yeah, I hope so. I don't know. I still don't see how it translates into a number 1 center, or we'll have to see. I will give a tip though. I would say the cheapest way to get a hold of the NHL Network, at least temporarily for a month, is a special run by Sling TV. You pick one of the packages and then you add the sports package, and I think it's like half off for a month. That's what I did last year. So it's like $40 or $50 if you don't mind spending the money to watch the WJC tournament. I think Fubo has it, but Fubo is more expensive for what that is worth. So, okay. So the Flyers went 2-1 this week. They broke a 3-game skid by beating Columbus, and then they played Detroit, who they're playing tonight. You got 4 goals from Scott Lawton. You could have given that last one to Garnet Hathaway, but Hathaway said, no way. You get it. All 4 goals. Another Tim Kerr. All this whole time. Who knew? The key thing about that game, I think, is after the declaration by Tortorella that he was the number 2 guy, because that's what Tortorella wants. And despite what Rachel and Russ said, which I agree, it's actually Kolosov with his situation who should be in the AHL. He made some really key saves and really made a difference in that game as Detroit was coming on toward the end of the game. And then the Flyers probably deserved a better fate versus Minnesota. But I think you had Fleury play like it was 2008, and Urson was just kind of okay. He wasn't bad. He was okay. And then, of course, you had Zamula getting beat on that play. I think his lack of speed came into the fore. So with that, I think we're going to call it a night. Do you have any final things to say, Chef? Any last word for the night?
No, I think it just, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to everybody, that celebrates whatever you celebrate. Just enjoy it. Enjoy time with your family, your friends, and watch some good hockey. You got some good tournaments happen over, hey, just enjoy it. That's all I have to say for now. You can argue with me there, out there on X if you want. You can find me at Chef the Left B on X.
You got it. Now, we are going to have a WJC preview with our buddy Steve Cornianos. It will not be released the night that we record it. We want to probably have it for you either Christmas Eve or right after Christmas. That decision needs to be made. We got to work out some logistics, but we will have a preview show so you don't go into that tournament totally blind and not knowing or having a clue what to expect. So just wanted to give you a heads up on that. But if in case we don't release it until after Christmas, that's certainly thoughts that I can second and get behind. The great Dan Silver, what's your last word for tonight?
You I've been traveling so much and I've been sick. I'm just looking forward to, and when people hear this pod, the game will have been over, but I'm just kind of looking forward to be able to watch the Flyers game tonight. So
there you go.
The little things in life.
Yep, I can appreciate that. Sometimes you don't know what you got until it's gone. The simple pleasures in life. Sit back, relax, get something to eat. Don't worry about this or that because you got a test or you're worried about a test result. Yeah, I hear you. and watch where you're walking. You might walk over a parking stop and trip on your face like I did last week. So yeah, so appreciate you listening tonight to us. Just a reminder that we can be followed, the O&B Puckcast, on X at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck. We're also on Blue Sky. We don't do as much there, but we're also at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck. We're also on Getter at O&B Puckcast, at O&B Puckcast. YouTube, just plug in there, O&B Puckcast. Our latest show should come right up for you. We have a Facebook page. And of course, we're on Apple, iHeart, Spotify, TuneIn, Amazon, Deezer, you name it. And if you could give us a 5-star rating, if we've earned that, we really do appreciate it. And if you could subscribe, follow, whatever applies to your platform, we do appreciate that as well. It helps move us up the charts when people are looking for Philadelphia Flyer podcast. And with that, thanks for listening tonight, everybody. And until next time, take care.